Hurin has been unleashed. Hurin has had his thoughts poisoned. And now Hurin is coming for vengeance. Maya, Govan and Melanine, and welcome to the second episode in this series explaining and breaking down Tolkien's epic First Age tale of the Doom of Hurin. In the last episode, I talked about the 7 rebels from Dor Lomin, whom Hurin recruited to be his followers, 7 men of the House of Hador who'd resisted Easterling rule in their homeland for years, and then decided to travel with their lord Hurin on his tour around Beleriand, pursuing vengeance. They are led by a guy called Asgon, who guided Hurin by ancient passes to the eaves of the forest of Brethil, and that night, Hurin disappeared. Now, we know what he got up to, I talked about it last time, but I want to kick off this episode with the story of the men that Hurin left behind, Asgon and the other 6. Because when they wake up the following morning, they find Hurin has vanished, and now a very difficult decision needs to be made. What do they do next? For a little while, the men search for their lord, fearing perhaps he's been captured by some prowling enemy. But the land is quiet. Too quiet. Asgon realizes there are eyes under leaves and ears behind stones, but none will give a hint as to where Hurin's got to. Now, the youngest member of Asgon's company is a guy called Ragnir, and I find Ragnir very interesting because he represents a totally different perspective from what we see in Asgon. Ragnir is too young to remember life before the Near Naiath Aranoidiad, before the Battle of Unnumbered Tears. He's only ever known Beleriand under the boot heel of Morgoth. While everyone else is talking about how valiant and incredible Lord Hurin used to be before that battle, Ragnir only knows the Hurin who was set free of Angband 28 years later. The Hurin who now speaks with strange voices to shadows in his sleep. And so, he suggests that they should abandon Hurin to his obviously evil fate, and instead they should return to their home in the mountains of Dor Lomin. But Asgon disagrees. He says it's little wonder that Hurin's mind is slightly unhinged after everything he's been through, and regardless of his eccentricities, Hurin is their rightful lord. The company swore to follow him. Now, they don't know where he's gone, which does make following tricky, but Asgon knows that Hurin's original purpose was to come to Brethil, so if they just wait in this mysterious forest, eventually he should come back to them, right? But this idea leads to another question. Wait here by whose leave? Like, who actually rules this forest now? It's been quite a few years since any men of Dor Lomin heard tidings from the mysterious woodmen of Brethil, and for all Ragnir and the others know, this could be an orc forest. Asgon reassures his men that the people of Brethil are good folk of the Edain, enemies of the Dark Lord, and their rulers are actually close relatives of Hurin. So, eventually the company follows their leader, and the general consensus seems to be that even if Brethil turns out to be an orc forest now, it can't really be that much worse than Dor Lomin, which is totally ruled by Easterlings at the moment. So, Asgon and friends set off deep into Brethil, where, before long, they are indeed swiftly noticed by the local woodmen, who always keep a close watch over their borders. After a full day of trudging, the company makes camp, and in the middle of the night, they are surrounded. Their watcher is seized and gagged, and the other 6 are abruptly woken by the March Wardens of Brethil, rangers of the House of Harleth. Asgon leaps up, and he tells the wardens his men come in peace, but the March Wardens are unconvinced. The men of Dor Lomin are taken prisoner, their weapons are confiscated, and they are dragged away with bound hands to the captain of the March Wardens, a guy called Erebor. Now, Erebor recognizes that Asgon and his men are indeed Edain of the North, and so they aren't killed on the spot as, like, Morgoth spies, but nor can they be trusted. Erebor says that evil things have befallen us here, and we live in fear. He has no choice but to escort Asgon's company to his chieftain, to let him decide their fate. But who is the chieftain? Who is in charge of the House of Harleth now that the chaos of the children of Hurin has ended? Well, to fully answer that question, first we need to take a little look back in time. Exactly 30 years ago from this moment, the chieftain of the House of Hulleth, the chieftain of the Hullideen, was a guy called Hulmir. And Hulmir had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. His eldest son was called Haldir, that's no connection to the elf from Lord of the Rings, and his eldest daughter was called Hareth. The other 2 I'll talk about in just a sec. But for now, what matters about Haldir and Hareth is who they went on to marry. Haldir married a lady of the golden-haired House of Hador called Glorithel, and his sister Hareth married Glorithel's brother, Galdor the Tall, the father of Húrin Thalion, the grandfather of the children of Hurin. It's easy to forget, but important to remember. Húrin's uncle, his mother's brother, was the lord of the House of Hulleth, the chieftain of Brethil, and so Húrin and his children do have some kind of claim to the lordship of this land. Anyway, when Húrin went to fight in the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, so did his uncle Haldir, and in that battle, Haldir was slain. The rule of Brethil passed to Haldir's son, a guy called Hundir, and after Hundir died in the same year that Nargothrond fell, he was succeeded by his son, Brandir the Lame. And Brandir was quite an important character in the tale of the children of Hurin. If you recall, after Turin journeyed from Dor-Lómin to Brethil, he encountered a woodman called Dorlas, and Dorlas brought him to the great settlement of the Hullideen, in the heart of Brethil, Amon-Obel, where chieftain Brandir had his hall. Now, Turin and Brandir had a complicated relationship, which ended with Turin murdering him. But before that happened, Brethil came under attack from Glaurung the dragon, and Turin set off with only 2 companions to slay said dragon and to deliver the woodmen from utter ruin. One of those companions was that guy Dorlas, who ended up abandoning Turin, fleeing in terror, and was then subsequently murdered himself by, of all people, chieftain Brandir. But the other companion was a relatively minor hero called Hunthor. Hunthor did not abandon Turin, he held to his courage. He stayed true, he saved Turin's life, and then he was tragically killed by a falling stone that struck him on the head. Now, if you're wondering, why on earth am I talking about all of this? What does it have to do with Asgon's company? Well, the answer involves those other 2 children of the old chieftain Hulmir, the younger 2. While Haldir and Hareth were marrying Glorithel and Galdor of the House of Hador, their siblings Hundar and Hiriel married locals of the House of Hulleth, their countryfolk in Brethil. We don't know who Hiriel's husband was, but we know she had a daughter called Meleth, and Meleth had 2 sons, one of whom was that guy Hunthor. It's very complicated, but Hunthor was also a kinsman of Turin's, his mother was a cousin of Húrin's, and although Hunthor is sadly dead now, his younger brother is not. Hunthor's brother is called Munthor, and Munthor is now the master of the North March of Brethil. Munthor is the lord whom that Captain Eborr takes his orders from. But there's still one more wrinkle in this very complicated family saga, because despite the fact that Munthor is Eborr's boss, it's not Munthor that Eborr takes Asgon and his company to. Munthor is the master of the North March, but he is not the chieftain of Brethil. There was a 4th child of the old chieftain Hulmir, a 2nd son called Hundar. And just like all of his siblings, Hundar also had a grandson who's really quite important to the story. And his name is Hardang. I'm aware I've just thrown a ton of quite similar sounding names at you, some of which are more relevant than others. Tolkien did not make this a straightforward story, but the ones that really matter for the rest of this video, as well as the next one, are Munthor, the Master of the North March, and his older 2nd cousin Hardang, the current chieftain of the House of Hulleth, the current lord of Brethil. And so it is to Hardang that Captain Eborr takes Asgon and the rest of his company, although, as we'll see later, it would have been better if they'd been taken to Munthor. Because the truth is, Chieftain Hardang is not the nicest guy in this forest. We're told that he had no love for Turin when he was in Brethil, he doesn't like the golden-haired House of Hador, whom so many of his family members married into, and he also doesn't have much friendship with his 2nd cousin. He's not a gallant man, and among the rest of the Hullideen, he has a reputation for being a lesser sire of this great family. but he was older than Manthor, and so when Turin killed Brandir at the end of the last story, it was Hardang who was chosen to succeed him. He became the new Halad, the new elected chief. Anyway, getting back to the actual story, Asgon and his men are blindfolded and then led by devious ways through the forest to the Great Hall of Hardang, which stands in the heart of their woodland settlement, Obel Halad, upon the hill of Amon Obel. This is the same place where Turin lived with Niniel during their time in Brethil. And it's here that Asgon and company are finally brought face to face with Hardang the Halad, who sits in his great chair and looks upon Asgon unkindly. The first thing he does is insult the men of Dorlomin. He calls their homeland a fief of Angband. He accuses them of being spies, and he castigates them for trespassing through his woodland. Asgon restrains his anger, but he does defend his men and his honor. He insists that they are Edain, of the house of Hador, which means they are forever enemies of the Dark Lord. They came to Brethil seeking friendship with the house of Haleth. However, he quite wisely makes no mention of Hurin, until Hardang pronounces his judgment. He says to Asgon's company that he won't murder them in cold blood, for he remembers the deeds of their countryman, Turin, son of Hurin, who saved Brethil from dragonfire by slaying Glaurung, the serpent of Angband, 2 years ago. But nor will he give them his friendship, for he remembers the deeds of Turin, and how straight after slaying the dragon he also slew Brandir, Brethil's previous Halad, their shared second cousin. So Hardang decides to banish Asgon and his company and to thrust them out of his woodland without any of their weapons or gear. He tells them they are never to return on pain of death. To which Asgon replies, basically, what Turin did or didn't do 2 years ago is irrelevant. The lord they serve is Turin's father, Hurin. And contrary to what Hardang's heard, Hurin is not dead. He has been set free of Angband, and he is on his way back to Brethil. When Hurin's name is mentioned, something strange happens to the Halad. A shade of dread falls over him. His face goes pale, but his heart turns dark. We all know that Hurin's life has been touched by shadow, and even mentioning Hurin's name casts that shadow over Obel Halad. The very fact he's on his way here inspires both fear and hatred in Hardang, and his hall soon fills with foreboding. When Hurin arrives in Brethil, things are going to take a turn. So, Asgon and his men are blindfolded again, and led back by secret ways to the North Marches. But just before being thrust out into the wild for good, they are reunited with Captain Ebor. And when he hears the judgment that Hardang has declared, he's troubled by it. Unlike his Halad, Ebor is actually quite a nice guy, and he recognizes that if Asgon and company are left alone in the wild without their weapons, they're gonna die. So he disobeys Hardang's command and he gives back the gear that was confiscated. And the reason why Ebor does the right thing here is because he knows that's what his lord would do. Not his Halad, Hardang does not do the right thing, but Hardang's other second cousin, the master of the North March, Manthor, he is an honourable man. And even though Hardang is the chieftain of Brethil, a significant number of the woodmen believe perhaps Manthor would make the worthier leader. So, Asgon and his company depart Brethil and they head north towards the crossings of Tyregleen, where they hope to eventually one day reunite with Hurin. Meanwhile, Ebor sends swift tidings to his master Manthor, telling him all about Hurin's imminent arrival in their wood, and back in Obel Halad, Hardang sits in fear and doubt. He knows that Hurin is the cousin of his father. Hurin was raised in Brethil. His voice really matters here, and whatever his intentions are, they are unlikely to end well for Hardang. And with that, I guess it's finally time to segue back to Hurin himself. What's he been up to since the last time we saw him? Well, after Hurin departed from the Chrysaegri Mountains in anger and despair after revealing the general whereabouts of Gondolin to Morgoth's spies, darkness descends about him. He stumbles over stones and falls into a deep sleep of grief. And in that sleep, he hears a voice. A woman's, speaking his name, calling him back inside the forest of Brethil. So the next morning, he follows that voice, and although he is utterly famished, for all his scant food is now spent, he journeys on like the shadow of a man, driven by a dark wind. The next night, Hurin is spotted by the night sentinels of Brethil, and these woodmen are filled with terror. So much so that they don't even dare to hinder him, or cry out, or make any move at all. For when they look at Hurin, they see a ghost out of some old battle mound that walked with darkness about it. For 6 days, Hurin wanders deeper into the woods, and for 6 days the men of Brethil fear to walk at night in their own forest. Such is the trepidation that Hurin comes cloaked in. However, on the evening of his 6th day, Hurin comes at last to a place that is as haunted as he is, a place of dark doom and lingering grief that all other living things now shun. In front there is a deep gorge through which the river Tyrgelin runs, and near its brink a tall standing stone with words carved upon it. But Hurin does not need to read those words. He's already seen them from his seat atop Thangarodrim through the eyes of Morgoth. This is Kabed Nairamath, the leap of dreadful doom. This is the place where the dragon Glaurung was slain and then burned 2 years ago, where Hurin's daughter Nienor cast herself into the ravine to end her own life, where his son Turin Turambar is buried. And although we're told that even animals do not dare tread here, as Hurin faces the water, refusing to look at the stone, he realizes he is not alone. Sitting in the shadow of Turin's grave, he sees another homeless wanderer, a figure, bent over, broken with age, clothed only in rags, a woman. The same woman whose voice Hurin had heard in his dreams. As he stands by the gorge and stares at her, the woman casts back her tattered hood, she lifts her haggard, hungry face, and Hurin sees her grey hair and her broken teeth and her claw-like hands. He looks in her eyes, and he sees that they are wild and full of fear, and yet still there is a light behind them, an elvish light, for which this woman once earned the name Dark Lady Elfsheen, Morwen Elethwen, proudest of mortal women in the days of old. For the first time in now 29 years, Hurin is reunited with his wife, in the very spot where 2/3 of their children died. I've already talked about this reunion in a previous video, but I think it's one of the most heartbreaking moments in Tolkien's entire legendarium. Hurin stumbles forward and he catches his wife in his arms. She says to him, "You come at last. I have waited too long." To which Hurin replies, "It was a dark road. I have come as I could." Morwen clutches his cloak. "You are too late. They are lost. But you are not." He holds his wife. "Almost," she says. "I shall go with the sun. But if you know, tell me, how did she find him?" Hurin thinks about their children, about all the tragedies he was forced to witness through Morgoth's eyes, about the incestuous marriage that he knows occurred when she found him. And so he doesn't answer his wife's question. He sits beside her. They watch the sun go down, and then Morwen clasps his hand and dies. When Hurin looks at her cold face, he sees that it is stern and pale, and yet the lines of grief and cruel hardship are now smoothed away. He closes her eyes, and as night draws down about them, he says aloud, "She was not conquered." He has been, Turin was, Nienor was, Laliath was, Dorlomin was. But despite all her sorrow and all her suffering, Morwen's life was never mastered by Morgoth. He vanquished her, but she was not conquered. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I'm quite sure everyone watching this will already be aware, by the time of The Lord of the Rings, Beleriand no longer exists. Brethil and Dorlomin and everywhere else I've talked about so far are one day doomed to disappear. But that's not true of every scrap of land on this continent. This spot where Morwen dies, where her son is buried, where the Stone of the Hapless marks the names of Turin Turambar and Nienor Niniel, this is destined to survive the ruin of Beleriand. When Armageddon drowns a continent, the grave of Morwen will become an island. And in over 6,000 years' time, when, like Frodo and Sam and Gollum are doing their thing, many, many, many miles off the northwest coast of Middle-earth, the island of Tol Morwen shall endure, an untouchable place that survived the apocalypse. She is not conquered. Perhaps, somehow, if Hurin knew that, he might take comfort in it, but alas he cannot. Now, he is utterly alone. He rises and tries to lift his late wife so that he might bury her, but he realizes he hasn't got the strength. He is old and famished and weary as winter. The waters of Kabed Nairamath roar on, but Hurin hears no sound. He sees nothing, he feels nothing, his heart turns to stone within him. And so he decides that he will stay with his wife, and he will die beside her. Except that is not what fate has in store. Hurin still sees through the eyes of Morgoth. His brain is still poisoned by the Dark Lord's malice, and as he sits beside the body of Morwen, a chill wind drives sharp rain into his face. It rouses him, and a deep black anger rises like smoke. It masters his reason. It expels all thoughts from his mind, save for an overwhelming desire to seek vengeance. And he aims this Morgoth-inspired wrath at anyone and everyone who's ever had dealings with his kin. He leaves Morwen's body where it lies, and he speaks the words, "The folk of this land will rue the day that you died here." Then he wanders away, back towards the crossings of Tyrgleen, until eventually darkness overcomes him again, and he falls down as one drowned in sleep. And it just so happens the place where he passes out is right beside the grave of another important lady from the Children of Hurin story, Hawdd en Eleth, the resting place of Princess Finduilas. If you recall, 5 years ago, Turin passed out and waited to die in this exact spot following one of the worst days of his life. But instead of succumbing to despair, he was found by the woodmen of Brethil. He was found by that guy, Dorlas, and he was brought to Amonobel where he met their chieftain Brandir. The reason I'm bringing this up, 5 years later, something very similar happens to Turin's father. But instead of being discovered by Dorlas, who's dead now, instead he's discovered by Dorlas's son. actually. Alright, the guy who first stumbles upon Hurin's sleeping form is a character called Sargroth, who isn't very important, honestly, but he has a very cool name, and he's part of a woodman company that includes a much more important character called Avrunk, son of Dorlas. While Hurin sleeps, Sargroth and Avrunk debate what exactly they ought to do with him. Sargroth immediately realizes that this old man is indeed the Hurin Thalion whom Usgon warned their Halad would soon be arriving. So Sargroth is afraid to engage with this sleeping disaster. Once again, a shadow falls on his heart. The power of Morgoth stirs among the woodmen, and fear infects their minds. And so Avrunk makes a dark suggestion. Avrunk is very loyal to the Halad, to Hardang. He sees Hardang as his route to, social advancement within the House of Haleth, and he recognizes that Hurin represents a significant threat to Hardang's power. So he suggests, why not murder Hurin right now while he's sleeping? Why not nip this problem in the bud? That is the best way to please the Halad. But as Avrunk makes this case, the captain of these woodmen overhears him, and he rebukes this evil idea. And this captain is Lord Munthor, the master of the North March. Munthor insists that his company must help Hurin in his hour of need, and he tells the men that Avrunk's murderous thoughts come straight out of hell. To which Avrunk replies, so does he. There is no help that he will not repay with evil. He comes from Angband. But Munthor overrules Avrunk's wicked advice. He kneels by Hurin, he kisses his hand, and he calls out in a loud voice, "Hail Hurin Thalion! Hail, Captain of Men!" As the words are spoken, Hurin opens his eyes. But because he's still got the shadow of Morgoth in his head, he never heard any of Munthor's kind words. As he wakes up, all he's aware of are the evil words of Avrunk. And so he immediately greets all the woodmen with aggression. He reaches for his sword, but Munthor de-escalates. He offers Hurin food, and he offers him a place to rest in Orbel Halad. To which Hurin eventually responds, "Take me thither. I have an errand to that house." And so Munthor sets forth, leading Hurin towards the woodmen's secret settlement and the great hall of their chieftain Hardang. But by the time they get there, Hardang already knows that Hurin's coming, for Avrunk ran ahead unbidden by Munthor, and he brought tidings that focused specifically on Hurin's aggression and his wildness and the danger that he poses to the people of Brethil. And when Munthor arrives at Hardang's hall with Hurin beside him, they are met by a great many guards, and Hurin is brought before the chieftain as a prisoner. Munthor tries to defend him, but Hurin is brought before Hardang in dishonor. So Hurin faces the people of Brethil, and from his great chair, Hardang faces Hurin. But he doesn't speak a word. Instead, he greets Hurin with an ugly look, and so Hurin is the one who breaks the silence. He says, "I see that there are so few chairs in Brethil that a guest must sit on the floor." "Guest?" Hardang replies. "Not one bidden by me. But bring the old Carl a stool." Now, poor Munthor understands how insulting this is. Remember, Hurin was raised in Brethil. His grandfather was Hulmir, the great chieftain of the Haladin. He is a hero of the Edain, elf friend, chieftain in his own right, greatest warrior of the race of men. Hurin should be given a great chair to sit in, not a stool, and he certainly shouldn't have to ask for one. So Munthor educates Hardang. He rebukes Avrunk, who's now lingering in the shadows behind Hardang like some kind of Grima Wormtongue figure, and he tells all the people of the hall that Hurin Thalion should not be left to stand. But for Hardang, Hurin's humiliation is kind of the point. He demands to know exactly why Hurin's come and what his errand is. Although, as he speaks these haughty words, he begins to realize maybe not everyone in this hall is on my side. So eventually, Hardang's tone turns gentler, and he makes an attempt to appease Munthor. To which Hurin responds with an absolutely fantastic insult. "Well, Master Reed of the Bog. So you bend with each breath, do you? Beware, lest mine blow you flat. Then he picks up the stool that Hardang gave him and he hurls it at Hardang's face. The Hullard of Brethil takes a presumably heavy wooden object to the forehead, and Hurin turns around to make his exit. Now, I think that is badass. Unfortunately, though, the people of Brethil thought it was like assault or whatever, so Hurin isn't allowed to simply walk away. Some people, either in pity or perhaps in fear of his wrath, totally are okay with letting him get away with it, but Avrank insists he be bound and imprisoned. The Hullard's been wounded, blood has been spilled, and now the old madman must face consequences. Hardang orders his men to seize Hurin, and so his arms are bound with manacles and a collar is tied about his neck. A noose. Then he is escorted from the hall and shut away in a cave from which he cannot escape. Hardang demands legal action. He wants satisfaction for the violence that's been inflicted upon him, and so it is decided that Hurin Thalion must stand trial. The chieftain of the House of Hador must be judged by the woodmen. And that is what I'll talk about in the next video. Hurin will get his chance to address the people of Brethil, he'll have Manthor defending him, and he'll have Avrank leading the prosecution. And without wanting to spoil what's going to happen in the next video, I don't think I'm going to blow anyone's mind by telling you it'll end in violence. For the trial of Hurin Thalion by the people of Brethil will set in motion the second great evil of Hurin's freedom. Morgoth is nowhere to be seen, but he can be found in every part of what comes next. So, to make sure you don't miss that, hit subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to click like and leave a comment on this video if you want to. However, until next time, as always, my dear friends, much love, stay groovy, and Navair